Hey, Rob, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good. The weather sucks here.
What part of the country are you in?
I'm in North Myrtle Beach in South Carolina.
Oh, you are? Yeah, we're up in Hudson, New York. Yeah, I mean, it isn't a sunny, beautiful day, but hey, it's that time of year.
Yeah, I'm just hoping we get that Yankee game in later. They're playing in Boston tonight. I heard it might rain there too.
Oh, it's raining. I see. Now here it kind of rained a little bit earlier, but it's not raining. I see.
Yeah. They got the Red Sox game tonight. It's basically a do or die situation for both teams to advance in the playoffs.
Oh, really? See, I haven't followed sports forever, but the baseball is the one thing I used to really follow. I used to follow baseball. I used to love going to the NBA playoffs, but when you make a living like this, you can't depend on having any time to do anything. I mean,
right.
I never saw the Walton. I didn't know what the Waltons were. Mm-hmm. I never saw Seinfeld. I didn't know what that was either. I had heard of his name, but I never saw a single episode, not one.
Wow.
I mean, and then people used to think I landed from another planet when I didn't know what the Waltons was. I was just like, you don't know about the Waltons? And it was like, so anyway, that's me to the T.
Yeah, well, you can catch Seinfeld on Netflix if you have it now.
No, I know, but I mean, I don't have the time now more than I ever did. As a matter of fact, I have less time now.
And you moved from where? L.A.?
No. Well, at one time in my life, when I was 18, I moved. I didn't like Los Angeles, and I was born there, right? So on my 18th birthday, I got on a plane for New York, and my mom was psychic, and so I mean, really seriously psychic, not like one with a shop, but I mean, anyway. So she was in New York, and she called me, and she said I was 17 at the time, and she says she used to call me Robbie. Robbie, you've got to come to New York. She said all doors will open for you here. This is the word she used. And so I was like, wow. So I hung up the phone, and there was a copy of Rolling Stone on the table that was open to the back thing where they have the little classified ads and stuff.
Right.
And there was a thing there that said Institute of Audio Research. And it was like a little postage stamp size thing, And so I saw that, and I thought, wow, that seems like a good idea. So anyway, that's what I ended up doing. I same class as Jack Douglas and Jimmy Iovine.
Oh, wow.
And then Jack and Jimmy were working at the record plant at the time. And anyway, I ended up getting the job there. Like, everything what my mom said was totally true. Like, it was like magical. The first week I worked at the record plant, I worked with Bob Dylan and John Lennon. And I was 18. And John Lennon gave me a pair of glasses that I still have.
Wow.
I mean, it's all totally crazy. It was like a fairy tale. So anyway, so I did that. And then I went, and it was Christmas of 1971. I went to go visit my parents in L.A., and I stopped at the Village Recorder because I always had a fascination for that studio because it wasn't in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. It was in West L.A. near UCLA, and it was like, a cool, much nicer part of town. And so anyway, I went and I put an application in there, and I went to the airport, flew back to New York, and 2 weeks later, Jordy Harmel called me and offered me a job, and so I decided to take it. I mean, on a spur, like I said to Jordy, I said, well, I'll think about it, and I'll call you back tomorrow. He said, well, no. He said, you'll think about it, and you'll answer in 90 seconds. And I was like, what?
Wow.
He said, yeah. I said, I just want to know now. And so I just decided to go. I just let my instincts take over. I said, yeah, I'm going to do it. And so that changed my life because, I became the chief engineer within 3 months, and then I did the 5 big records in a row. I did Sail on Sailor with the Beach Boys, You're So Beautiful with Joe Cocker, Planet Waves with Bob Dylan and the band, Goat Said Soup I worked on for 2 weeks with the Stones, and then No Reason to Cry with Eric Clapton. And that was all in an 18-month period, or 19 months, whatever it was. And, I was 22, 23 years old when I did all those records, right?
Wow.
And so anyway, that was the start of that. And then, so I had moved back there in January of 72. I went back to California, and then I ended up doing the Planet Waves record in late 73. And then we went on that big tour, Dylan and the band tour in 74, in early 74, the Tour 74 it was called. And then that was the first big tour, that nature with the private jet and all that stuff. And for some odd reason, I wasn't I wasn't with the crew on the tour bus. I was on the plane with David Geffen, and like there were 13 of us on that plane.
Wow.
And I was on that bloody plane. I don't know how that happened, but it did. I didn't realize what it meant, at the time. I do now, and I did afterwards, but I was like, no way that happened. And so anyway, yeah, it was just fascinating. And then when we got back, Robbie, I took a leave of absence from the Village Recorder, and then Robbie said to me, Rick found a house in Malibu. He's the one that Rick found Big Pink too, Danko,
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, he said, Rick found a house in Malibu and we want to put a studio in it. Would you build the studio? And I said, sure, so I ended up, doing that. And then I bought it from him after the year was up. We just had a lease in the beginning. And then, I ended up owning it for 10 years. Now Rick Rubin owns it, and he got it like, he did, on my advice, he bought it like, I don't know, it was 12, 13 years ago. So anyway, and then I stayed there, and then Chris Blackwell called me at one point he had seen The Last Waltz, and he said, there's nothing, he said, I've screened every music film ever made. He said, there's nothing that even comes close to this. He said, would you come and work on a movie with me? And I said, sure. And so I went and did that. And then we got on really well. And so when that was over, he said to me, he asked me to come and visit him at the hotel. And this was in Los Angeles. And I'd been in LA for, I don't know, a couple of months mixing this film that we did, and it's called Good to Go. It was about go-go music, which was the beats that became hip hop. It was out of Washington, D.C. And Chuck Brown, Trouble Funk, Little Feat. I mean, not Little Feat, Trouble Funk, Chuck Brown, Reds and the Boys, and EU. Those were the four big bands that were in it. And so anyway, so I did that. And then he says, I went to see him. He said, listen, this has been a really great experience. He said, would you be interested in helping me get my record company together? And I said, yeah, that sounds like a good thing. He said, you sure? Yeah. And I said, yeah. So anyway, we talked about it. He said, go home and write down on one page of a legal pad what you would want. And maybe at the movie lot tomorrow morning, and let's go over it. And then I did that. He took the piece of paper, put red check marks next to everything, wrote reasonable next to expenses. And he said, this is your contract. He said, give it to Art Yeager, who was the head of business affairs at the time. But next time you're in New York, and this is your contract. And so I was vice president of Island for 5 years, and I didn't have a title. My card just said vice president, didn't say anything next to vice president. And so I had the office next to Chris's, and I traveled around, for 2 years. I was with him every single day, every meeting, we were on a plane every 3 days, and we were all over the place. And anyway, it was a huge education, because I had come from being an independent producer to seeing the other side of the fence, which I was always interested in doing. And that was a huge eye opener. I mean, a lot of things I was afraid of turned out to be 100% true, but anyway, it was, so that's kind of the history of my little moves around. And I've designed, so there's this studio that we're building. This is about the 12th studio that I've designed over the last, 30 years. And this is a unique situation. So this room Lenny Kravitz bought this church in 2008 and made it a studio. And then he moved. Then 2013, Henry Hirsch decided he wanted to retire. So Lenny moved to Brazil, and they sold the place, and we bought it from the guy that bought it from them.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So you're going to redesign the studio in that building? Well,
yeah. I mean, it's a 150-year-old church. And it's the weirdest thing of all is that the dimensions of the big room of the sanctuary, the big part of the church, are identical. This is so weird. Identical to Abbey Road Studio 2. There's a 1-inch difference in the width of the room.
That's cool.
I mean, it's that exact. I mean, is that weird or what?
That's pretty cool.
Churches are built to what's called the golden mean always, and that's the thing that Da Vinci came up with. And so Abbey Road used the golden mean. The coincidental part is that it happened to be the exact same dimensions. It's not just the same ratio, it's the actual dimensions are the same, which is totally strange. I mean, if you ask me, I mean, wow. So anyway, yeah, that's the place, and it's going to be great.
When will it be done?
Well, I'd say where everybody's optimistically saying January 1st, but I'd say February 1st.
Very cool. You got any acts lined up to?
I got one.
Come
I got a
record?
starter, but I had others. But we thought this was going to be done like in July.
Mhm.
But a 150-year-old brick building has a lot of issues, and that is what we've had to deal with. Mold, a lot of mold in the lower part. That 100-year-old mold. I mean, that's never been addressed. The walls were over it, and shit like that. So that's really gets intense. So it's all fine though, and we're well on our way. And I mean, I think we can make January 1st, but we'll see. I'm just being realistic and saying February 1st.
That's pretty cool. I read in your bio that you hitchhiked from Southern California to Hollywood. Is that after you went to sound school and stuff?
No, this is way before. No, because I skipped 2 grades of school and graduated when I was 16, and
Okay.
all my friends had cars and stuff, because when I was 16, they were 18, that kind of thing, right? So when I was 15, I was hitchhiking sometimes I had friends who'd give a ride, but I didn't want to bring them in there. But somebody told me that the back, if you went down the alley behind Gold Star, there was a door in the back and it was always left unlocked, which is true. And so I'd hitchhike up there and go in the back door, and this, after 6 o'clock,
Right.
when the receptionist left, and then just sit on this couch and nobody be there. There's like a vending machine and a sink and this couch and the 2 studios. And then when somebody would come out of one studio and they'd see me sitting there, they would think I was with the other session, and vice versa. And so I never got thrown out until I did it a few times. And then one of the engineers started to see me there with different sessions and realized I wasn't with anybody. And then, and then I got invited in by Doc Siegel, and Doc Siegel was the chief engineer at Village Recorder when I took the job. And I'm the one that, his health wasn't good, but I'm the one that took his job, weirdly enough. I mean, that's a real coincidence all those years later. But yeah, so I used to hitchhike. I used to see Phil Spector work. I was there when I happened to be there the day when Buffalo Springfield recorded For What It's Worth.
Wow.
Yeah, I was there during that afternoon when that track was cut. And I saw Phil Spector working with the Righteous Brothers and Sonny and Cher and, J.J. Jackson cutting It's All Right and, a bunch of major stuff. I mean, it was really, I didn't know anything about anything. I was just fascinated to be in there. But it was, as the time went on and I learned more about how things work, a lot of those things came back to me, and I was fascinated to think about how they did things. I mean, like I saw the Beach Boys, Brian Wilson and them in there working, and there must have been 15, 17 musicians in the room. There were only 10 microphones, right? Mm-hmm. And later on, I thought about that because, here we were when we were the way we were trained, you'd have 5 musicians and have 25 microphones. Now you got, 17 musicians and 10 microphones. That's pretty different, right? So
right.
There's all of that, and I got really back into that. I mean, I do records now with that song that Keith Richards and I won the Grammy for on the Hank Williams tribute record. That's 5 microphones. It's a stereo mic and 4 other mics.
Wow.
Recorded at his house. Yeah, I mean,
and that was almost 20 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so I've been doing that for quite a while now. But I've been doing this 55 years at this point. It's like.
When did you cut your teeth, though, as a producer? What was the first experience, and what was the song that you recorded?
Well, it wasn't like that. I mean, so Sail on Sailor, I was the engineer, right?
Uh-huh.
But it was Carl Wilson pretty much produced it. But it was just a small group. It was Ricky Vittar, Blondie Chaplin, myself, and Carl. That's it. And then a little bit involvement from some of the others. Brian wrote the song with Van Dyke Parks and Ray Kennedy, but they didn't even have any lyrics. It was just called Sail on Sailor, and it was just chords. But anyway, so that I was the engineer, but it was already kind of overlapping with the producer kind of thing at that point already. But then it was when I was doing the album I Can Stand a Little Rain with Joe Cocker, with Jim Price producing, that what happened was we were doing the vocal for You Are So Beautiful, mm-hmm. and which was recorded, by the way, in let's see, either 3 or 4 countries. Let me think. Let's see. It was done in, there's a vocal that we use bits of that was from London, New York, LA. Yeah, there's 3 cities, right? So anyway, I did a comp of the vocal. I told Jim Price to leave the room when I was doing it so he could come in and hear it with a fresh ear. And then Joe stayed in the room with me, right? So I'm making my choices and I'm putting it together. And then it gets to the end, and there's that thing with the crack in his voice, right? And so I heard that, and I mean, I was a young buck still at this point, not a lot of experience, and I didn't know that much, but I just thought emotionally that just encapsulated the whole feeling of the song in one little tiny moment, and I just thought, wow, we got to use that, right? So I looked at Joe, and he smiled, and I put it in there. And so then Jim Price came in, and I called him in to listen to it, and he said, "Well, that sounds fantastic." He says, "But what's that line at the end? We can't use that." And I flipped out. I jumped up and hit the console. I said, "You can't use that." I said, "If you don't use that, I fucking quit." And I stormed out of the room, and I went out, and I was standing out on the street on Butler, the street that the villages. Joe came out there and put his arm around me. He said, "Don't worry, we're going to use it." And so anyway, but then I ended up finishing the record. So, I mean, the credits read that I engineered it, but actually, I helped with the string arrangement, and I'm the one that took the drums off of it. And it had drums on it. You're So Beautiful did. And, and I had a lot to do with it. And so in a way, that was sort of my first production. And then Planet Waves there was no real producer. There was just Bob Dylan and the band and me. And there wasn't a real producer. I mean, Robbie kind of was de facto producer, but we really kind of did it together. And there were sessions that were just me and Bob, and Robbie wasn't there. So, it was like it kind of worked its way up to that. And then when I did Stingray with Joe Cocker, that was the first official production that I got to, that put the band together that became Stuff. It was Richard T. and all those guys, and Cornel Dupree and all them. And anyway, that's the first record that I was officially the producer on the contract.
Very cool.
But leading up to that, a lot of what I did was production, right? And then I produced Eric Clapton's No Reason to Cry. Mm-hmm. Of those 5 records, that would be, that would be there were 2 that I was actually officially a producer, not just doing the job of a producer, right? So anyway, yeah.
What was it like working with the Stones?
Well, I mean, it was kind of, you're pinching yourself quite a few times. I mean, you're like,
I'm sure.
You kind of can't believe you're actually in the room with them. But I mean, it was great. I mean, everybody, that was a very drugged out period. I mean, Jimmy, I love Jimmy Miller. I've always loved his work. I loved him. We got along famously. And, I just loved Jimmy Miller personally and everything about him, his work, everything, all but his drug habits. But I mean, that was just, the Stones eat a lot of people alive. I mean, it's like they get subjected to the situation and they don't have the kind of discipline and willpower that Keith Richards has. I mean, that's what a lot of people, people think Keith Richards is like some, fucking crazy person that has no limits, but it's like, he's anything but that. He's actually fucking smarter than shit, and he also knows exactly what he's doing. He is not screwing around or taking any chances with that stuff. I mean, and that's what everybody else didn't get about him. They thought, they believed like Keith used to say to me, he says, "Well, Rob," he says, "somebody's got to be Keith Richards." He says, "I guess I'm the guy," you know what I mean? Because that's not who he really was. I mean, he wasn't that guy that's portrayed out there. Anyway, that was interesting in the fact that I was exposed to a lot of that. It was an amazing experience because of the potency of the music and the potency of the whole situation. I mean, forgetting the drugs and all that, just, there was, and then coming off Exile on Main Street,
mm-hmm.
That was just a damn big deal. I mean, because Jim was involved in Exile on Main Street, and Jim was Price, and he was involved in the Stones thing. And I think we did Joe Cocker's record before the Stones session. I can't really actually, I'm a little foggy if it was just before or just after. But anyway, it was, it was, naturally it was an amazing experience. But I mean, like I said, it was even more fascinating in the weirdest way that I was in a session when I was 18 with Bob Dylan and John Lennon, on an Allen Ginsberg record for 3 days. And I was just kind of couldn't even believe that I was in this session with these guys. I was
That's pretty cool.
Whoa. Well, it's amazingly cool. I mean, especially when you're that young and you're trying to, you're just trying to get your foot in the door. And boy, that's kind of a big foot in the door there. So, anyway, that was, I mean, but you start to realize that, listen, these artists, man, what they thrive on, what they yearn for is people to treat them like regular people, and to just, put all that other crap aside and just, be a real friend to people and like go, you know what I mean? None of that other kind of image related, press related stuff that, it's just like real communication. Because I found that, the other guy that I was super close to was Jerry Moss from A&M, and Jerry loved me because I just treated him like a regular guy. I didn't kiss his ass. I didn't, it's just, and that's what these guys like. I mean, they just like you to be real and, and you just got to kind of keep your head,
Well, Keith Richards referred to you as a genius. What is that like hearing that?
Well, I was totally grateful, and I had no idea, of course I like the disclaimer part where he said, along with the badge goes, he's a bit of an arse, it's like, that goes with the badge. I mean, which is true, his nickname for me was always Mr. Overbearing, you know what I mean? He was just like, I was just too intense, and it was like, so I mean, I take all of it with a grain of salt, but of course that was a really beautiful thing. I mean, I mean, only person in the whole book you referred to is that. And I mean, I of course that means a lot. I mean, but it doesn't change your life or anything, but it's kind of great. I mean,
I think it's pretty cool.
Well, we're really super close friends, like we're brothers, It's like,
nice. We're
those kind of close friends. I mean, we're just, not that we talk to each other every day or anything, but more like brothers where, you talk once in a while and like, but you're just like joined at the hip kind of thing. So that's what we're like, so that's really great.
Did you have a good relationship with Bob Dylan? I mean, you must have if he wanted you to design the studio, right?
Yeah, but he's much more enigmatic and like, I mean, Bob's a real mystery job. I mean, he's, and communication wise too. I mean, we got along great. And, one of the craziest things was that, so we're doing Planet Waves. So my family, I'm Italian. And so my family came over from Italy, both sides. I'm like, well, by the DNA test, I'm like 87% Italian. And the other 13% is from, European countries surrounding Italy. But anyway, no, I'm not, there's no, nothing, no American in there or nothing. But in any event, so I'm very, 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 very Italian, right? So in any event, wait a minute, I'm sorry, I've started thinking about three things at once.
You're talking about, I was asking you about your relationship with Bob Dylan.
Oh, right. So anyway, so my dad's sister, Mafalda, my dad had 5 siblings, my mom 7. And so the family came through Ellis Island. My dad's family in 1910, my mom's family in 1912. And weirdly enough, both families went from Italy to Minnesota, which you got to say to yourself, what? I mean, the climate doesn't add up. And that's why the mafia started in New Orleans, because the climate added up with Sicily. Right? So in any event, so they go to Minnesota. And so at one point along the way, the Frabonis were in Hibbing. And so anyway, my dad's sister, Mafalda, sends me a letter that I get like about 3 days into doing Planet Waves, which only went on for 5 days over a course of a week. And so anyway, she had sold the house that Bob Dylan's parents moved into when Bob left home to become Bob Dylan, when he moved to New York, right? So they wanted a smaller house and they bought this house from my dad's sister, right? So she sends me this letter with these 5 black and white photographs with the little crinkly top and bottom, and it says like May 1957 or something, on the bottom, and 3 pictures of the inside of the house, 2 pictures of the outside, and this little letter, saying, Robbie, she said, thought you'd be interested to know I sold the Zimmermans this house when Bob moved away to New York and blah, blah, and I was just like, what? So I thought, oh God, I can't show this to Bob. I don't know him well enough. So anyway, I kind of hung on to it and I took it on the tour with me. So this was like the beginning of November. So now we're like the middle to late January on the plane one day, and we were the only 2 people awake, and I showed it to him, and he was fascinated. At first he was like, where'd you get this? Like I was A.J. Weberman or something, I said, no. And so I let him read the letter, right? I had the letter with the pictures. I just showed him the pictures at first. But anyway, so that was all kind of funny. But, we always got along really well, Bob and I, and we're still in touch. I mean, not like on a regular basis, but we are,
You designed that studio for his specs, right?
Well, no, that's all bullshit. That's somebody, I don't know who wrote that, but those were my specs, and he had nothing to do with it. It was the band studio.
Oh, Because
no, Bob Dylan doesn't have any studio specs. Are you kidding?
No, I'm just.
Fuck all about
I
studios.
read that in your bio on.
I know that, but I'm just saying that's just hypey crap that I should have taken out of there. But no. It was. I mean, if anybody put 2 cents into the specifications, it would have been Robbie Robertson. But I mean, which he probably did. I mean, but really, I just built that. I figured it out myself, and I did it with Ed Anderson, who was the band's tech, who started with the band in the very, very beginning. You know, he was with them on their very first gigs, and, you know, Ed Anderson. And so anyway, yeah, so that's, you know, Bob had nothing to do with it. Bob doesn't know shit about studios. I mean, he just, you know, he's great at a lot of things, but that ain't his deal. But anyway.
Well, that's good to know.
Yeah. But everybody kind of talked about what they wanted it to be like vibe-wise, the guys in the band. You know, I was really close with Richard, Rick, and Levon. The three of us were like joined at the hip, right? So, you know, that's who I hung out with all the time out there. And it was the three of us that talked about it the most. I mean, Robbie was the more kind of, you know, executive of the situation, if you will. And like, you know, he fancied himself to be a recording engineer and stuff. So he would actually have specifics, you know, that were taken into consideration, of course, but that weren't really any big deal at the end of the day. But no, there were a lot of things about that place that's cool, and I mean, some happy accidents that we're using in this new situation that I learned, you know, doing it. But yeah, there was an echo chamber that was on an adjacent wall to the studio, and echo chambers usually, you know, they have a speaker in them and they have a couple of microphones, and they're very rare nowadays, live chambers. But we're building one at the church, at the studio. It's called Trinity Lane. Anyway, we're putting one in at Trinity Lane that happens to be, weirdly enough, the space that we chose is almost the identical dimensions to the echo chamber that was at Shangri-La, which is totally weird. But in any event, the thing about it was amazing was that it shared a wall with the studio. So you had a door that went from the studio into the echo chamber, so you could crack the door open and you could let sound come in naturally, not through a speaker, into the echo chamber. And that was like, nobody's ever really done that before. And it was just like spectacular. And I mean, Jordy Hormel saw that. And then when he built the studio at the Village for Fleetwood Mac, Studio D, the one they did Tuscan, I mean, he built an echo chamber as part of the studio to emulate the thing at Shangri-La. I mean, he didn't do it that well, but he did do it. And so now we got the same situation here where we've got a studio, wall that's adjacent to the echo chamber. So we're going to have that same situation, which is so spectacular. I can't even believe it's my favorite thing about what we're doing is that.
That's
believe
cool.
it or not. Yeah.
The Last Waltz. What was it like working with Scorsese at that studio?
Oh, it was fantastic. I mean, when it came down to being in the actual, you know, the mixing the movie and all of that sort of stuff, oh my God, you know, he's got such a creative spark. I mean, he's really powerful on that level, and that's why he's so good and successful. But, you know, like, for example, he says to me, listen, what I'd really love to do, Rob, is to have the sound match the picture. He said, in other words, if there's a close-up, I'd like the person in the close-up to be really loud, like more than would be normal. And he said, and then if you say there's a shot from the back of the stage looking out to the audience, I want to hear the hall. I want you to hear what you see. You know, he said, really hear what you see, right? So I ended up doing that, and it really worked. And but it's like, see, you would have no way to be able to find this out, because if you got by the DVD does not have that mix on it. The DVD has a mix that what happened was when they were going to do the DVD, Robbie Robertson had cozied himself up to Paul Allen. And so weirdly enough, Paul Allen hired this guy that I trained to be an engineer at the power station, this guy, Dan Gellert. He hired Dan to be the engineer for his studio up in Seattle. Paul did, right? I didn't even know this, right? But anyway, he did. And so then Dan's the one that mixed the Last Waltz that's on the DVD. But the thing is, Robbie and Marty and I were busy, and we couldn't go be part of it, right? So Dan did it by himself, right? And so anyway, he mixed it like a record. He didn't have the sound match the picture at all. I mean, it's just flat, right? So the thing is that if you take the one that I did and you take the picture away and you listen to it, it sounds like I was on acid or something. I mean, there's all things are jumping out sound wise. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But when you put it with the picture, it becomes this really immersive experience. It's like a whole different thing. And so what I eventually did was I had a copy of I had a pristine stereo copy of the soundtrack that was on the 70 millimeter print. And so I took that and stripped it onto the DVD. And I have a DVD that's got the 70 millimeter soundtrack on it. And wow, what a difference. I mean,
that's pretty cool.
When you put them next to each other, it's kind of drastic. And then, see, I invented this technology called Real Feel that worked on for like 20 something years. And it makes digital audio feel like analog.
Wow.
Now, I didn't say sound, right? I said feel.
Uh-huh.
And the thing is that a lot of this crap that people are on about, that things don't sound warm enough. And I could throw up when I hear people talk about this warm crap and like running stuff through tubes or whatever. Nothing's going to fix any of this stuff because that isn't the issue. And people don't get it. They all got the wrong end of the stick, as Keith said. I mean, in other words, it's like, really, the issue is to do with something else completely. It's not to do with sound. It's to do with the ability for the medium to transmit the emotion. So analog transmits emotion perfectly, but digital is a bit of a roadblock for emotions. And it's because digital audio has the same effect on the central nervous system as fluorescent lights. Mm-hmm. That the end result's the same. And the reason is that fluorescent lights are flashing on and off 120 times a second. And so, unlike an incandescent bulb that has a filament that has persistence, every time the light goes into zero voltage, 120 times a second, it shuts off. But your eyes can't see that. It's too fast, right? So, but an incandescent bulb, that persistence of the filament washes over that, and the incandescent bulb stays on all the time and never shuts down. So that's why fluorescents are irritating. Now, digital audio is flashing off and on somewhere between 44,000 and a million or 10 million times per second. If you go to DXD, there's 10.2 million samples a second in DXD. But even that, at that high of a resolution, has a negative effect on you. I mean, not as bad as the CD does, or let alone an MP3, which is totally awful. I mean, I won't listen to MP3s. I've never listened to Spotify in my life. Mm-hmm. I don't ever intend to. And now Apple Music has got WAV files on there. And so I might consider that. But, 90% of the information on a MP3 it's the WAV file converted to an MP3, and 90% of the information's been thrown in the trash. I mean, I met with the guy that was the architect of the MP3, J.J. Johnston, and at Microsoft on this campus in Seattle, and he explained to me exactly what goes on. He said, we met, and he was all romantic about 2-inch tape and analog recording, and we talked for a couple of hours about that, and mm-hmm. and then when that was all done, we started to kind of get to the heart of the matter. And so he says to me, so what? He says, what do you think here? He says, so you got an MP3 of a song, it's 40 megabytes. He said, now you got a WAV file, it's 40 megabytes. You make an MP3, it's 5 megabytes. He said, where'd those other 35 megabytes go? And I said, well, wait a second. Aren't I supposed to ask you that? And he laughs, and he reaches down and grabs a trash can and points at the trash can, and he says, this is where the other 35 megabytes go. He said, compression my ass. He said, we're just throwing away information. He said, all the dimensional information that takes up the most room digitally, that's what goes first. He said, what's left is something that enables you to distinguish between instruments. He says, but all the nuances and subtleties are gone. And he said, and that's by intent. He said, that's just the way it is. He said, there's no other way to do it. And and then Steve Jobs said that to Neil Young. I don't know if you ever heard this story, but it's been printed now. But mm-hmm. Neil's at Steve Jobs' house for the first time. And so Steve says to Neil, you want to hear some music? This is after they've been there about 45 minutes. Neil told me the story himself, but then I saw it in an interview. So anyway, Steve says to Neil, Neil says to Steve, he says, Steve grabs a vinyl record and goes to put it on. And Neil says, wow, man, you listen to vinyl. And Steve says, oh, yeah. He says, I want 100% of the music. He said, we only sell 10% to the public. Amazing that he knew that, right? Mm-hmm. I didn't even know I knew that. Because when I went and had a meeting at Apple about Real Feel, which is the name of this technology I've got. And Jobs came in the meeting. He was only in there for like a minute, but I was in there with the meeting was with James Higa, Higa. James was a stealth guy at Apple. His card said James Higa. Didn't have a title. He had the office next to Steve Jobs, right? He was like the right-hand man. And so anyway, he's the guy that Jobs walked into his office one day and said to James, I want to start a music service. And Higa dreamt up iTunes.
Wow.
And that's the guy we met with.
Pretty cool.
And Robert Kondrick, who was the actual head of iTunes at that point. Higa was still Higa, which he didn't have a title, right? But anyway, Higa and I are still in touch. He hasn't been at Apple for, God, I don't know, 20 years or something, or, well, 15. But anyway, yeah. The extra issue is the MP3s.
Yeah, everything I record in to a WAV file.
Right, but that's still got that problem I was talking about with the stopping and starting and the subconscious and all that. WAV files are, there ain't a perfect digital medium. There isn't one, but that's where this technology I invented solves that issue in terms of it's not about sound, but it makes digital files feel like you're listening to analog. You could be mistaken. You can muscle test. You can do a kinesiology test, and your body thinks it's analog.
That's pretty cool.
Oh, it's very cool. I mean, it's hugely cool. And so we're just trying to decide how we're going to we were about to start to take meetings again. I met with Amazon. I met with Apple. I met with a bunch of people. And we were getting close to something. But then I wasn't really ready. And then the pandemic ended up hitting, some years later. But still, that was when that year, what was it, 2019?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That year we were starting to set up meetings to start to decide. I had these real intense meetings with Sony, and they were talking about wanting to buy it, and they were offering them, big money, 9-figure money. But I didn't end up doing that. But I wasn't really ready. Now we're ready. So
I assume you got a patent on that and everything, right?
No patent.
No?
Trademark. You don't patent software, because what you're doing is you're putting it out there for anybody to steal.
Oh, I gotcha.
And that's what's interesting, that Sony said to me, that when we were having that talk, they said, God, we pray to God you don't have a patent. And I said, no. And they said, okay, because we wouldn't be interested if you did. And then when I was trying to get investment, when it started, that's all that anybody cared about was, do you have a patent? And then, and Sony was like, we don't even want to talk if you have a patent. So, and that wasn't because they were going to try to steal it, which they probably were, but it wasn't that. It was just that this guy at Mitsubishi told me this about 20 years ago. They stopped patenting stuff. I don't know if you know this, but did you know that Panasonic's business model, literally their business model, was taking anything Sony invented and improving it?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so this guy told me that, this Japanese guy told me the whole story. And that's what they did for the longest time. Now, they do make stuff of their own now, but they still do that. I mean, to some extent. But they would just take whatever Sony invented. Sony would patent everything. They'd go into the patent. They'd make a few changes to it. They'd repatent it with their own name and then its own model number and stuff like that. And that was their business model. Yeah. And that's why their stuff always sounded better than Sony's. I mean, anything Panasonic's better than Sony. And I don't say the televisions, that's a different thing, but all the electronics, the Technique stuff is really good with it, which was Panasonic, and yeah, it's really interesting, but it's true.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's like that with lots of products, right? Not just sound products. I mean, it could be
of
anything,
course,
right?
Yeah.
People could just take something that somebody made and designed, and they just make it, like use the same model, but just make it a little better, right?
Just slightly change it. Yeah, but I mean, the thing is that with certain things, it's a lot harder to get away with that. With electronics, the way the patent thing works, I mean, it's just little tiny things that you're changing that, and if you're building like a car or some physical object, it would be a lot harder to pull that off. But when you're talking about the little subtleties involved in electronic design, it's a lot easier.
Yeah. What do you feel about auto-tune?
It's great for certain things, but I mean, it's sort of like, what do you feel about neutering? You know what I mean? It's the same thing. I mean, I went to a studio once in Nashville and somebody was tuning a George Jones vocal, and it affected me so adversely. I went in the bathroom and puked. I mean, literally, it made me sick. I mean, because what made George Jones sound like George Jones was the liberty he took with the notes. Right. And the way he bent things and way it made him sound like George Jones. The minute you take that away, it's like it's sort of like Aretha. Aretha sings sharp. Bob Dylan sings sharp. I mean, there's a lot of people that have these idiosyncrasies in their singing that aren't about perfection. It's like it's what gives them the personality and their thing, that's recognizable. And if you don't, it's okay, auto-tune, but you got to be really judicious with it. And use it only when you absolutely have to, not abuse it. Especially when they take it and put it on auto and they just run, like these fucking hip hop records. Oh my God.
I know.
Yeah, you might as well go to a machine shop and listen to the machines making their little sound, their little rhythmic pattern and call that music. You know what I mean? It's like same shit,
Mm-hmm.
I kind of doubt anybody's going to remember any of this stuff a few years from now. It's sort of, that's where, Adele was such a breath of fresh air because she was like seriously real talent and you're not going to forget about that. But then she got kind of bastardized a bit too along the way. They started pushing her in different directions, but you just don't get that many artists anymore of that with that level of talent, that seem to make it through the process to where about it. I'm sure there's some badass singers like we could never imagine in the middle of Africa that we've never heard, but I'm just saying it's like, you know what I mean? It's hard. It's hard to not be totally discouraged by all this, it's kind of, I've had plenty of days where I just feel like, why bother? This is just like a waste of time at this point. But then again, there's a couple of different ways to look at it. So
is there anybody that's out right now that you like to work with? Somebody that you're interested in?
Well, one of my favorite artists in the world right now, as far as it goes, is Lisa Fischer, who sang with the Stones for a while, but I think she's the greatest female vocalist alive on earth today, personally.
Mm-hmm.
For more than just her voice, but everything about her. Just the way she approaches singing and her person, who she is and all the rest of it. But I don't know, my favorite kind of, and I'm not totally up on everything and I'm not going to remember everything, but the one thing that sticks in my mind is the Black Pumas. I love the Black Pumas. I think they're just unbelievably great. And that's one of the new things that I really like. And they're not a kind of a hip hop artist. It's what we were talking about just a minute ago. They're closer to old school R&B, but anyway, they're just amazing. That's, them I love. Other than that, at this point, there's people I've heard that I think are great, and they're not all coming to mind in a flash right now, but
mm-hmm.
in any event, like the Black Pumas, though, like I say, really stick. I love the Heavy, that band out of England. I just love them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they broke it up, but we were talking about working together at one point. But there's no real, there's a couple of young artists you would have never heard of that I'm interested in, stuff like that. But there's nobody that's like known that I feel that way about. That's kind of at a start off level that you might know. You know what I mean? I can't think of any.
Yeah. You've worked with so many great artists over the years. Do you have a favorite?
Well, yes and no. I'd say probably the most important record I ever made
mm-hmm.
to me is Native Dancer, the record I made with Wayne Shorter.
Okay. That's
probably the crowning jewel. Planet Waves is way up on the list. I'm just trying to think, beyond Native Dancer, there's a lot of stuff that are kind of at equal level, doing The Last Waltz was a fantastic experience. And I invented so much technology and so much stuff that makes no difference anymore because of digital audio and Pro Tools. But at the time, Paul McCartney called me one night and had me on the phone for 90 minutes, and he was about to put out Wings Over America, and this is before Pro Tools and everything. And he had all these questions. How'd you do this? How'd you do that? Why does this sound so good? Why, et cetera, et cetera. And it was significant what we did on that. It was 18 months of I think I took one day off a month.
Wow.
For 18 months. Yeah. And it was big time hard work, but that was really worth it. And that was, so that project stands in a place of its own on that level. But musically speaking, there's plenty of stuff that I really like. But I would say probably Native Dancer and Planet Waves. Planet Waves just because of the way it happened, and it was live in the studio, and it was a really unbelievable. It was an unbelievable experience, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Winning the Grammy in 2002, would you say that's the highlight of your career?
No, no way. I don't think Grammys are any highlight of anything. I mean, I think that you know, that's just it's bullshit. It's all fucking slanted and, you know, paid off, and there's nothing fair about that. Just like the Academy Awards, same story. I mean, it's just what's great is being nominated for a Grammy. Winning, who gives a shit? But the nominating part, where you get grouped with these people that are really good, and the stuff does have a certain quality level. But then when you look at the stuff that's been overlooked, you got to say to yourself, Jesus, what's this all worth, really?
Right.
I mean, look at the fact that Cary Grant never got a bloody Academy Award. Can you believe that? I mean, and when you think about how popular his movies are now and how they hold up, like if you look at TCM, mm-hmm. you see more of him on the screen than anybody, and he never got an Academy Award. I'm just giving you an example. I'm just trying to make a point here. You see what I mean? It's mm-hmm. like, that's why you know, God bless it, I got a Grammy and all that. I'm more proud of the times I was nominated, you know, and the record that really deserved to get a Grammy was Hubert Sumlin's record that won a John Handy Award. But I mean, you know, B.B. King won his 13th Grammy that year because it was his 80th birthday, and Hubert never won a Grammy. And Hubert's arguably one of the most important guitar players that's ever lived, and he's not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And everybody, Jimmy Page, Eric Clapton, Keith Richards, everybody that matters has come forth and said that Hubert Sumlin has to be in the Hall of Fame, and nobody, you know, it's not happened, you know. Wow. And he was arguably the most important guitar player ever. And when I met Keith and Eric, they both said to me their favorite guitar player of all time was Hubert Sumlin. Both of them, independently.
Wow. What would you say is the highlight of your career?
Well, I guess if you talk about that on a technological achievement level and everything else, it'd have to be the Last Waltz. I mean, you know, just because it involves so many things. I mean, it was way, you know, that's like doing 10 records, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That one project was like doing 10 records, right? So, I mean, I would say that would have to be the crowning jewel. And then the other cool thing is that it's like old wine, it's getting better with age, you know?
Do you enjoy working on movies as much as working in the
studio?
Yeah, but
it depends on who you're working with, right? I mean, yeah, I don't work on that. I haven't worked on that many movies, probably about a half a dozen, but I do, but it's, you know, boy, that's a huge, you talk about collaborative art. I mean, making records is collaborative art, but you're talking about 6 to 12 people. On movies, you're talking about 50 people, right? And I mean, it's a whole nother complicated situation. So it's really about how good the director is. And then you got all these issues with the union. We had to hire a guy to read the newspaper when I was mixing The Last Waltz because I wasn't allowed to touch the board because I wasn't in the union. So this guy was just there reading the newspaper the whole time, getting paid like, you know, some stupid amount of money, like $100 an hour, to just sit there and read the newspaper.
Wow.
Yeah, and I was doing the work, right? But, you know, so that's, you know, movies are fun, but it really is so relative to the situation. It's hard to have a simple answer to that question.
Geffen got big into movies, right?
Oh, of course he did, yeah. That was the corporate thing and all that. I mean, it's amazing because I can't remember the little details of it, but there were little clauses in some of these contracts that he did where he got money from them, but then things reverted back. He had some really good lawyers that made some clever moves, and he made out like a bandit. I mean, I can't remember who did better, Branson or Geffen. I mean, one was $900 million, one might have been $1 billion. I don't know, they was close, but they're the ones that got the most money for their sales of anybody. A&M would have been next at $500 million. Blackwell got $330 million. You know, there's a couple I'm forgetting, but anyway, yeah. But yeah, Geffen was. You know what I liked about Geffen was that he was hip enough to surround himself with the best people. Mm-hmm. Like you could say he was egotistical or stuff. You know, in a way he was, but he wasn't so egotistical that it was at his own expense. I mean, that he actually was smart enough to always surround himself with, always look for the best. You know, that's what I do when I do things. I just want the best. I don't give a shit. I mean, if somebody outperforms me, good for them. You know, I don't care, but I do care about them getting the best I can find. And that's what Geffen that's why he was so successful, in my opinion. And Branson was kind of the same way.
Have you ever worked on music videos?
Yeah, not too much. I hated them, but anyway, I hated the depiction of lyrics in a video. I just thought it was the worst damn thing, because music, the beauty of music is that when you have the lyrics to a song, it allows everybody that hears that song to interpret it their own way. It doesn't define how they're going to take those words and what the mental image they're going to get. And the minute you define it and put it on a video, you're screwed. And I mean, and I hated that. And the thing is that the Who had that documentary called "The Kids Are All Right," I think it was called. Mm-hmm. And at the end of it, this was in the 80s. At the end of it, there was no reason to cry. I mean, there was no reason to cry. There was "Who Are You?" It was the last thing in the movie, and it was the video of them doing that track, and the video was amazing because it was all performance. It just showed them cutting the track. They're wearing headphones and stuff. It cuts to them doing the overdubs. You see Roger Daltrey overdubbing his vocal. You see Pete Townsend overdubbing the guitar. But the one thing that was really telling was there's this little one-finger piano part in that song that no average listener would ever hear in a million years. And you see Pete overdubbing that part. It cuts to it briefly, but you see him overdubbing that piano part, and the average listener can suddenly hear that part because they can see it. Mm-hmm. Then they can hear it. But if they didn't see that, they would never know that's what it was. And then it adds another dimension to the thing. And then when you look at that, you can watch that 10 times, and it's still interesting every time you watch it because you're seeing new things all the time. And it's never touching the subject matter of the song. Never even relates to it in any way. It's just a performance. Those kind of music videos I like. Mm-hmm. The other ones I just despised. Oh, absolutely. Okay.
All right, I'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.